Hi, I'm Amale Andraos. I'm the Dean of Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. And it's a really exciting time for the school. It's an exciting time for me to think about the school in terms of its history, but also where it's going. I think if you think of Columbia's GSAPP, it's always been a sort of experimental and kind of progressive mode of education. There's both a feeling of open-endedness and kind of an open sense of what architecture can be. But at the same time, there is a sense of the discipline and its history. And so I think the two have always existed together. What I love about Columbia is that it never chose between architecture and a real sense of engagement with the world. And that's something that's very important for me and for the faculty and also for the students. Many challenges, but today, how do you bring reinventing architecture and reinventing the architect together? How do you bring discourse and practice together? How do you teach architectural history at a time when half of our students are not coming from a Western tradition? How do you engage with technology, but also how can you be critical of technology and not just kind of believe in a sort of very positivistic view of the world? So these are the questions that I think architectural education is facing today. And as I said, how do you also speak about the discipline, but also critique it and find ways to bring the disciplines together, because in fact GSAPP is not just architecture. It's really a school of architecture and the built environment and the other programs, preservation, urban design, even real estate development, urban planning, the critical curatorial program. All these programs really are interacting with architecture to ask questions. So we're also trying to find ways to intersect these disciplines to almost create new ones. We've also restructured the studio schedule actually to carve time for conversation. And in Advanced Studio, we created this transfers dialogue session that are led by Juan Herreros, and it's a way for all of the studios to intersect and ask questions. What do we mean when we say critical? What do we mean when we say, to try to find conceptual, experimental, like what are these terms that we use as architects? What do they mean today? And so that's been kind of very exciting because it's revitalized the studio culture. And these conversations aren't just happening amongst architects, we're also bringing the other programs to enter into that conversation. And that's been really sort of exciting. In my own architectural education, that it was so linearly Western. And I think everybody is very sensitive to this. And I think when my predecessor, Mark Wigley, set up Studio X, it was a way to undermine these narratives of center and periphery. And I think that's very powerful and did create a kind of very interesting feedback loop between the conversations that were happening in these various cities and then making New York equal, not a center, but a kind of part of that network. And I think we're really continuing that. But bringing that, again, to the depth of the curriculum, we're changing how we're teaching history. We're kind of in the process of questioning that. It's part of the life of the school that this is a global condition and that we are constantly thinking in a relational mode, and I think that that's really transpiring through the ways of teaching and this kind of engagement with not only contemporary global issues, but also historical perspectives. And the experience of students here, I think it's quite successful, the exposure of diverse perspectives. So it operates on different levels. One level is through the faculty-director relationship. So For example, the Global Africa Lab, which is led by Professor Mabel Wilson and Mario Gooden, have a very strong relationship with EMPO Metsipa in Johannesburg, and there's been a number of workshops, and there's going to be a big conference on African cities in the spring. I worked very closely with Noura Akawi and Naaman for many years, and last year we did a huge conference on the question of the Arab city and the question of representation in contemporary architecture. That would not have been possible without this kind of ongoing relationship with the Studio X director. Similarly in Beijing now, in Asia, we're kind of creating new relationships. The faculty is kind of where it starts in terms of a conversation and in terms of setting questions that then get explored in a sort of feedback loop, in the sense that you don't just go to a place once, you go many times, and you have a real kind of networked collaborative relationship. One of the experiments we're doing now is, I always feel like our students are very entrepreneurial and they're very interested in this entrepreneurship question, to take this kind of attitude and be able to do something about a concern, or to find ways to use architecture as a form of knowledge to practice in a different way or operate on a different site. And we are launching a space that, as part of New Inc., it's the GSAPP incubator at the New Museum New Inc., for our recent alumni, up to 30 alumni, to investigate alternate modes of practice. How do we engage art, architecture, technology, and the future of cities in that sort of space of supported freedom, let's say, for a year. And it's a way for us to kind of support that desire to kind of be engaged. And what's interesting is that on the one hand, you have alumni that is very interested in new forms of practice, and but on the other hand, you also have some of our students who launched their own publication called Colon a few years ago, now are also going to be part of that incubator space, and they're very interested in the kind of the political question of political engagement, and bringing a kind of critical outlook to this question of entrepreneurship. So that for me is a moment where new forms of practice and new forms of discourse are coming together, and should be quite exciting. We have to find other models, right? We can't be well, for one thing, I think, of course, as a school, if your passion is design, and certainly we are completely obsessed with design, and most of our students end up working in great design firms, and certainly but there are students that want to try to find other ways, and so to support that is also important, and because it's not so linear anymore, and maybe it wasn't ever linear, but academia thought it was kind of linear, and it's not. I think that even if you ask any of our faculty, everybody has carved a kind of, or weaved a sort of hybrid mode of practice, and there isn't a single model. And I think certainly the school is fostering this idea that there's just no single model, so we have to find ways to support alternates. I love Colombia. I mean, I came to teach here. I always feel like it's home, because it has an incredible sort of intellectual generosity and a sense of openness and diversity that's very unique. It's also very urban. After all, we're in New York. It's an incredibly dense global city, and that transpires through everything we do. And I think that has always been part of the school's history, and is something that is really critical. We're not a science, but we're also not art. I mean, it's a cliche to say that we exist at the intersection, but it's an important cliche, because at a moment where the sciences and the humanities are sort of drifting apart, I think we can occupy an important space of intersection. Even if you think about the question of climate change, we're having a really big symposium on December 4th in kind of echoing the conversation that's going to happen in Paris, and we're bringing the best scientists from the Earth Institute with humanities scholars and historians, and to look at this question not just from a scientific or technological perspective, but from a humanities perspective, from a discursive perspective. And this is something that an architecture school of the built environment can do. And so I think architectural schools, certainly Columbia, can foster.